welcome to our WEED-sponsored, our second Art Plus education program. And a dear WEED member and who used to be head of exhibitions committee and who is an incredible artist is going to be speaking. Art is for all of us, stories and images from California Prison Art Studios. So in a moment, we'll have Sharon Siskin introduce Carol. And I just want to remind while waiting and see if other people come, that we have several announcements. We have an exhibition which just mounted at Gallery Route 1. Pamela Blattner is one of the co-curators. And we're going to have two online exhibition artist presentations on September 27th and September 30th. The one on September 27th, there's from 7 to 8. And we'll have half of the artists. And at the end, I'll read the names of the artists. And then September 30th from 5 to 6. So it'll be a nice way to meet all of the artists who are in the exhibition. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce Sharon Siskin, who's going to introduce our speaker, Carol.
Thank you, Mary. I'm going to be reading from a piece of paper in the old-fashioned way, so I won't be looking up at everyone, sorry. So thank you for being here with WEED on this lovely Sunday, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce my dear old friend and grad school buddy, Carol Newborg. Carol was born in Chicago, Illinois, and spent most of her academic educational years at the University of California in Berkeley, where she studied art therapy as an independent undergraduate major and received her bachelor's degree. It was at UC Berkeley that she also earned her Master's of Arts and her Master's of Fine Arts in sculpture, where I was fortunate enough to meet her. Carol has a national exhibition record exhibiting her work in galleries, educational institutions, museums, and public sites for more than 40 years. She's been a recipient of numerous awards and residencies, including a Paula Krasner Grant and residencies at Montalvo Center for the Arts, the DeYoung Museum, Artist Studio Program, 3 residencies at Playa in Summer Lake, Oregon, and Nabalom Cultural Center in San Cristobal, Chiapas, Mexico, to name a few. Carol has taught in community art centers, public schools, prisons, and colleges, including the Creative Growth Arts Center, Contra Costa College, Pitzer College, UCLA Extension, California State Polytechnic University in Pomona, Oakland's Children's Hospital, and California Rehabilitation Center. Since 2012, she's worked for the William James Association as the San Quentin Prison Arts Project and Arts as the San Quentin Prison Arts Project and Arts and Corrections Program Manager and Visual Arts Instructor. Sanctuary spaces and natural forms have always inspired Carol. In her studio work, she has continued to make sanctuary installations since the 1980s. Her sanctuary installations have been a bridge to her long-term community-engaged work with art in California prisons. In the mid-1980s, Carol had a California Arts Council grant to create a new studio in a women's prison outside of Los Angeles. She had said often, she later realized that the art studio was a type of sanctuary, as are the other prison art studios in which she continued to teach and collaborate to this day. Her work inside San Quentin has a deep impact on her work as an artist and life as a citizen of the world. The relationships she has respectfully worked to build inside prisons have had a lasting influence on how she understands her work as an artist outside the prison. The social responsibility and ethical stance of her voice and actions to shed some light on the inside for those of us on the outside. Even now, as COVID has closed prisons to visitors who bring arts programming inside for more than 18 months, Carol has devised ingenious, practical ways to contribute to support and nurture personal expression and art making inside San Quentin. Carol has said that the role of art in prison to help people heal and change confirms for her the necessity of art to life. She has written, "My ongoing work in arts and corrections inspires me to continue to explore my own deepest connections to art and its meaning for me, a way to experience nature and to share the world with others." Carol, thank you for generously sharing your work with us here today.
Well, thank you, Sharon. That's a big honor to be introduced by you, especially with all the work you've done. And yeah, I want to thank everybody for being here. What the work we do is to try to bring these invisible people's artwork out to make people who we ignore visible. And I also want to thank WEED for hosting this, and I've been active in WEED for quite a while. A lot of things in my life are decades long, and WEED does a lot to support women identified artists working in the environment and social justice. So I'm going to share my screen now, which will take me a second, and go here. Is everybody seeing the screen, the slideshowy thing? Okay. So as Sharon said, I was in Berkeley and actually worked at the Contra Costa County Psych Ward, and then the Psych Ward and the Contra Costa Jail. And one way or another, my work is doing art as therapy led me into a lot of interesting and very educational places. And so when I moved to LA in 1983, I was connected to UCLA Extension, and at the time through them learned about arts and corrections. So I was hired to teach art through UCLA Extension for a class in '83. And I was sent to this luxury resort hotel, California Rehabilitation Center, that really was a 1920s luxury resort hotel that didn't survive the Depression. And eventually the state owned it, and it became a Navy hospital during the Korean War. And this is the dining hall for the staff. It had a marble tile floor, and the beautiful, I'm sorry for these 1980s slides, are really cool, but the beautiful hand-painted decorations. And they also had a great culinary program in that kitchen. And mysteriously, there really was a rehabilitation focus. You know, it turns out like the 60s and 70s, like California Rehabilitation Center had sensitivity sessions, sensitivity training from the 60s, if y'all remember. And that they had drug admits. And so people were in on an indeterminate sentence and would get out when a panel determined that they were, you know, had worked through their problems with drugs and wouldn't commit crimes again. So it's different than the way our parole works now. So there were a lot of healthy programs at the time left, you know, when I was there in the 80s. So the first class was a basic drawing class I was teaching, and this was one of the spa spaces with, I don't know why they had the water in the pool, maybe the guards used it, I don't know, but because they have mineral waters there. This is Norco, California, in Riverside or San Bernardino County, Riverside County. And so that little hallway over to the right, we had card tables and folding chairs, and that's where we held art classes. So and I've always, working in prison, when I'm making up complete projects where it's not open studio, I've done a lot of things where it's about people sort of creating their own world, because in prison you have zero privacy and no space of your own, really. And so this was just a basic, like, we're going to draw a room and make it your room project. And we were working with the Vanishing Point, and I said there were about 23 women, I think I counted at the time, had to turn in attendance. And I said to start in the upper right. And I looked around, and it was like 3/4 of the people were at a different corner. And I realized then that learning differences were a big factor. among the prison population, which now I've read is, documented. And that has a lot to do too with people not fitting into the education system, but having artistic or other talents that, they had no way to know about or develop. So offering art helps for a lot of people who are left out of the system otherwise. So after being there teaching, I got a California Arts Council Artists and Social Institutions grant to work with Arts and Corrections. And this little storage shed that you see to the right was going to be my ceramic studio. And it was pretty small, but it had a great view, just like the rest of the hotel. And actually we had someone come in and do a pit firing up there and said that hillock there would have been where the native population would have centered, because it was a hill in an otherwise flat area right there in the valley. So that all these chairs were brought for us and brought out of there. There were a lot of strange things stored there for like the past 10 or 20 years. And we got ourselves a little studio, and it actually worked out great. And it was a nice space. And so the first projects I was doing were coil pots. And even just that, the simple project, I realized how important it was for people to create their own physical thing. For me, sculpture and clay has always been a natural fit, but people loved it. And of course, people had references to some people had grown up doing pottery. And then I brought in images of how pots are decorated by Native Americans and Mexican American Native populations. So those were ideas for what you could do on the outside, and people took it whichever direction they wanted. But it was also, I realized there's something very healing in the women working together in a small space there, and the way that you get kind of you don't filter yourself as much because you're working and creating, and the sharing atmosphere in there and the peacefulness of it was, something I got a lot out of just by being there myself. So here was one gal's piece. And then we were working again with the idea of your own space, working with slabs. So someone made something that reminded them of where they'd grown up. This piece had to do with a memory, a dream actually, that this woman had had. And then we had even more, the making your own space. Somehow I was connected to Nader Khalili, who's an Iranian architect who was teaching at SciArc, an architecture school in LA at the time. And he had someone who worked with him who came out and taught us this technique of building. It was actually based on work he had done in Iran, and was thinking could work in areas of the Southwest in California, because it was a way to build a house that could survive an earthquake. And so you'd build with bricks in this dome shape, and it was sort of like a teacup inverted on a saucer, and it would be attached to the floor, essentially the ground, the under part of the house. So in an earthquake, the whole thing could just slide and not fall off the foundation. And then you pumped in the fuel and fired it from the inside. So it seemed like a great fit for the women to learn to make their own spaces, and kind of interesting architectural techniques of building a dome and building arches with bricks. And it was a pretty wonderful feeling seeing people were very into it too. That's another thing with prison, is that sometimes that very repetitive type of work like that is very satisfying and relaxing. And you also see women wore muumuus in prison in the 70s and 80s. I don't know when we switched to everyone being in blues, but and they could wear their own clothes too. And that partly, but the other prisons worked that way too. And then the fiber artists came in, always got to use all the old muumuus that were tossed. So led to some quilting projects too. And I love how she took this and made the tree and just really was making her own world. And Another thing about your own space and the safety of that, even, well, that's obviously imaginary, is there was a woman poet, Sharon Stricker, who was teaching there then. And she told me she had learned that somewhere around 90, in the 90% of women in prison have been abused sexually and or physically. And the number for men is somewhere in the 60s. And I haven't checked recently, but I know that's still it's an overwhelming percentage. And it's another factor of why, prisons aren't really a good solution for solving trauma, that people have been so damaged and need other forms of work. And a lot of programs in prison do help people address their trauma and work through it. And that's one reason that prison work is so inspiring, is because people have gotten so in touch with their feelings and so aware of their past and how they're processing things and where their anger is coming from. So many people do that hard work. And it's inspiring. It's much more sensitive than I am, certainly, and then a lot of us on the outside have that. And so it's moving to be around that level of being tuned in to where your feelings are really coming from and how you're reacting. And people, it's very hard work. And I do feel like the writing programs, the art programs, music, all that helps support that transformative work, because you build confidence in yourself and you express things you may not have known, and you learn your abilities to grow and work with, and start mastering something. And it helps support the other really hard work that's needed to work through those traumatic pasts. And this may seem a little not serious, but this gal had been a madam. So she designed a brothel, her ideal little business there. So, and another huge aspect of why art in prison is a great fit, should I say, it is everywhere, but it helps people connect to their families. We say, the whole prison is the whole family is in prison. It affects, immediate family, it affects the community. And we know there's so much more intergenerational trauma by people being in prison and their kids not seeing them and growing up with that as either that separation damaging them and the harm of that being a common role model. It's just, so anything positive that you can foster between families, and also putting more people in prison closer to or treatment closer to families, makes a difference. So each of the women did a fish tile, and then this was over where the toys were kept in the visiting room, so they could show their kid what they had done. But a lot of the women made things for their kids or their family, and that means a lot by the people who receive it on the outside too, that connection. And collaborations are just really interesting, working together one way or another, and fosters a sense of community. This was a group of women that made a little cloth mural based on a sort of a Mexican village memory that they made up, the memories and shared fantasy kind of thing. So, and then this was put up on display for a long time in an area where a lot of the women came to work and go through the administration building. We had a photographer there one day. And here was the space that we eventually moved into. We were obviously a little crowded in the storage room. So we moved into what had been the morgue for the Navy. So there were some strange drains and pipes, and but it wasn't haunted. We were good. There was a part of the prison that was haunted, but it wasn't this. But, or so people said. But this was a great space, actually. And since the women had, well, super underpaid, but the jobs working in carpentry and doing other things, they were great at getting the tables and the drying shells, everything we needed. We had a wonderful workspace there. And then right outside it was that area with the hill with the view and picnic tables to work on. So the program it kept going for quite a while in that space. This was Tom Skelly was the artist facilitator for 30 years or more at a nearby men's prison, CIM, California Institution for Men. And this was and he was a painter. And so he brought images of birds and worked with everyone, painted birds. And then he cut out, jigsawed out of wood, the bird shapes, and they painted their images again. This was like the practice, and painted them again on the actual cutouts. And then he had painted the background, and and then it was designed for an architectural space over some double doors upstairs in the hotel administration building. And so I just love how each person got to do their own thing, and yet it all flows together so beautifully. It was and all of these, I know a lot of people might be teaching or working in community, and some of these ideas still inspire me. This was, again, making your own world. We were doing collages in boxes that had a self-portrait element. And these were shown at Cal Poly Pomona at some point with an icons and altars show. There were a lot of things done in the 80s and on into not much in the 90s that aren't allowed now in prison arts. And masks making is one of them. But I thought this was pretty phenomenal. This project had a guest come in and do it, with the tape, the gauze tape and the plaster and decorating. There's something fabulous about creating this other self and fun. And then we had self-portrait collage project. This was Deborah, I don't remember her name. She was the curator of photography at the Riverside Art Museum. And so they were telling their story in some way or another, and there was a bit of explanation. And the clock image is something you see in a lot of prison art. And then this woman's piece it's very poignant for me because this was so true for so many of the women, and it's hard, you can't read that here, but it's about, I look like I'm enjoying myself and being so happy and playing, and the real me is like this wrecked car, this broken windshield above. And pretty good art piece for saying that too, just somebody working spontaneously in a workshop. And this piece, this is a series, Bob Sullywoda, an artist from New York, a photographer, had a grant from Kodak. And I really like the way he used photography, and it's something you have to be really careful of. And now it's very limited how photographers can come into prison, but people can exploit and have done a lot of exploitation of artwork and people's images from inside. But this was with each person would choose their own setup, exactly how they wanted to be in their self-portrait. It was the art studio. They posed with their art and set up different things. And then they actually had someone stand in and see how it would be. And then they were there, and they didn't actually shoot the picture, but then they got the Polaroid, and then we used the negatives because that was this kind of film, and they learned to print their own cyanotypes out in the sun there. And then Bob also printed up editions of it. So I really enjoy it. These are so old, and I still love them. That was with the gym that had been in the morgue area that we took over, got moved into the theater area at the back so they could still have performers. And we had amazing visitors because it was LA. Like I specifically remember Ruby Dee coming to sing and talk. And we had great people come out. That was Brandy, I remember, very, very fit. So, and then this wasn't my work, but you see a lot of women's work. I think Sharon told me about Sherry Lynn Wood. I'm not sure, but this is another aspect of what's healing with arts in prison. Like, this was a group of women that made all these crocheted hats, and then the artists took them out and installed them. And then they were all given to kids in shelters and, people who needed this. And that's in Oregon. I don't know if it's still going on, but for quite a while, there was a group of men being led to do this work, except they were knitting all kinds of things, blankets for babies. And it was all things that went to help kids in shelters and foster care that didn't have as much as they needed. So that's a very healing thing in itself, like giving back to the community. And there's a lot of language around that inside about making amends is one way, but the giving back and restoring the community you damaged. And it helps people, and it helps people on the outside, obviously. So that's yet another healing aspect. And it's part of what you hear in there with people doing a lot of work with restorative justice and other programs. And there's so much truth to this: is hurt people, and healed people, heal people. This was from Margot Jensen, ran the program for women of the prison. It used to be at Stockton for women. And this, again, was a giving back. And a lot of the old arts and corrections programs worked this way, where there were paintings done that were given to the children's ward at County USC Hospital. Lots of works were created for DMVs and other. And this was a series of small quilts the women made that went out to a social service center to try to teach, I think. Yeah. So I was doing this work and organizing exhibits because it just sort of naturally happened. And we had shows at the Riverside Art Museum that was a little later, but started at the Norco Library. And then I was eventually, after the 3 years on the California Arts Council grants, then you can't do them again for at least a year. But I started with CDCR, at the time it was CDC, California Department of Corrections, had an actual arts and corrections office and head administrator, Bill Cleveland. And so they hired me as an outreach coordinator for the state. I was based in LA, and we set up shows and events. So this was a show at Self-Help Graphics that more of the portraits and other work was in that. And then we had multiple shows at City Hall in LA, images from inside, and we would have panels. And this is still what we do. We'd have panels of people who are now out, who had been in the programs, who could talk about what difference it made in their lives to have the art program and how they've grown and changed. So it helped inspire others too, I believe, by doing that. And it's that whole thing of making the invisible people visible, getting the real voices out there. And we were able to do pretty amazing things. And like at Watchtowers Art Center, we had a great show juried by John Outerbridge. And he, like most of the jurors, you don't really want to say to somebody, oh, you can't put your piece in. So everybody accepts all the artwork for the juried shows of that sort of community, or back then in the 90s they did. But we had a local musicians, and then we had a local poet, and then he was reading some of the poems from people inside. And so it just was, we drew all the arts together. It wasn't just the visual art show. And we were able to bring in community participation a lot more. And we've always made a point with the program trying to give honorariums or payment. It wasn't like you need to volunteer your time from the community. So that it was a great exchange. And one of the things we organized, there used to be a fringe festival in LA that had started with the Olympics. So we ended up sending a klezmer band into CIM, the men's prison, and the LA Times was there and photographed. It was a big deal at the time. And it was just, I mean, the mostly Mexican-American guys that came out in the yard that day, and they were like down doing that kazatska, how I don't know how you really say it, but where you squat down and you kick out your feet. style dancing to the klezmer band. And it was just an amazing collision or an intersection of worlds. So, you know, we've always tried to do that, bringing in people from the outside and then bringing the artwork and the poetry, the writing, the music, whatever we can out so that there's less isolation inside. Another show, the book arts, and we had many forms of art going on, many teachers. So anyway, I did that work. I had a break when I had kids for about 10 years and I was working some at local schools with tile murals and at the Santa Clara County Children's Shelter. And then what happened meanwhile, while I wasn't working, was the funding through the 2000s started falling off in general, there were state issues. But the program had been started in 1977, was the pilot project for Prison Arts Project. And it was founded by this woman, Eloise Pickard Smith, who you'll hear a little about later. And she was on the California Arts Council, and she was visiting the prison at Vacaville and was during a show and met with a man who was head of the Arts League. And he said, you know, if we had art and music programs in here, it would save lives and it would save you money, which is 100% true. And she believed, you know, she looked at it and saw what was going on and realized it made so much sense and got the funding in place for a pilot project. And it went really well. And eventually by 1980, with her and others lobbying and working with the state Senate and everything, they funded prison arts programs inside through the Department of Corrections. And every prison had a full art studio, and they were starting to build a lot of studios later. I mean, prisons, they should have been building studios, but they were building so many more prisons through the 80s and 90s. But each one had an art studio, had a full-time artist facilitator who could hire contract artists and get supplies and is the way for art in prison. And there were stages, music storage. So it was a really healthy program that's a world model still in a lot of ways. And then the funding was declining and declining. And then by 2010, they ended all the arts and corrections funding from CDCR. But they changed the name from CDC to CDCR, with the R being for rehabilitation the same year. But anyway, so I came back to the work inside at San Quentin, where because of the William James Association that always helped hire artists and keep the program, you know, keep an eye on it and run it in all the Northern California prisons. They had the teachers had been so devoted, they had started working for a couple of years with partial hours, no pay, and people, one way or another, they kept the program running with volunteers, people that were part of the other jobs inside that would come and try to sit with the music group and keep the bands going. And then eventually, with support from California Lawyers for the Arts and the hard work of the people at William James Association, they did refund arts and corrections, and it through the California Arts Council now. And so that was 2013 when it was brought back, and it's been growing ever since, but now it's up and down and up and down. So I came in 2012, and so prison that is, you know, well known for, has tremendous programming in general, teachers from all over, yoga program, and it's always growing that way because it's right in the Bay Area here. But this is not atypical. There's art all over and different spots. This is the history of San Quentin painted around a guard shack. So San Quentin started as a boat offshore from San Quentin on the Waban, and it was post gold rush, and the prisoners would be out on the boat. I don't know what they did, but the guards would then lock them up and row home at night and then come back in the morning. I was like, anyway, but then eventually the people on the boat were the ones that got to build the new prison to start San Quentin. And so it was the first prison in the state. And here's another part of the local history and building. So that's right near our studio, and here's indoors there. And it's a really clever use of a very small space. So you're looking toward the front. So just directly out front would actually be that Mac shack about 10, 15 feet away. And there's just, these are the older tables, but everything, there's a small upstairs loft. There used to be a printing press up there. All the tool storage was there. And the guys rebuilt it all to be stored downstairs now because upstairs is used for something else. And they managed to even like build a press into it. So the press is sort of like goes inside a cupboard, like it's an old style sewing machine. And this is actually the view from inside the upper part. You're looking out at a catwalk where the officers walk back and forth at times. So it's, you know, amazing that people create. And, you know, this is actually a real studio dedicated to art like this is so rare in the prisons. And it's so beloved and so taken care of. So this fellow, Josh Locke, was a tattoo artist, and the work on his arm is his own, I would guess. And there's a certain amount of crossover with, you know, a normal prison art when you don't have art education and tattoo art, and people are really skilled and really creative with their designs. And he got out and he's doing great. I think he did like 15 years or something. This fellow, Khalifa, is still inside. He must be going 30 some years. But this is the kind of thing this is an image, that little picture in the corner, him and his mom on a slide when he was a baby or a really young child. And it just, I think it's this kind of work that helps connect people to their past and work through things. And then there's the way that, like I was saying about people giving, there was a guy that was coming in for about 5 years, relatively recently. He's been out a while now and doing great, but he would do just a series of sort of cartoon images, one for his daughter every week, and mail it out to her. And he said when, you know, her walls were covered in his artwork, and that kind of connection can mean a lot. Yeah. Thomas Grider, there's a guard tower, as we say. This is a very architecturally minded artist. And this, again, I think some of these, so much people can escape into the imagery of the painting. I love this outer space or whatever image. And this fellow, Chadwick Tobias, another person who's out, he did this image, which has been on a book, Paths of Discovery. So all these great pictures are shot by Peter Mertz, M-E-R-T-S, petermertz.com, incredible website with like tens of thousands of images of dance classes, flower mandala projects inside the prisons, just all sorts of arts and corrections documentation. But he's been shooting inside San Quentin for over 10 years. And this was the cover of Paths of Discovery, which he did with Larry Brewster, also did a lot of the research. He's a social researcher, educator, and he did a lot of the research and like showing that people who take art are involved in the arts and corrections programs for at least once a week for 6 months end up with a 29 or 27% reduction in recidivism. You know, there's a lot of factors there, but it helps people tremendously. So I just like this image, you know, is it a tattoo? Is it the image of him in his own mind? It's a good piece of work, yeah. Omid Mokri he's Kurdish from Iran. His father, the family had a restoring Persian miniatures and other artifacts and antiques business. So he was trained in that, but he's been to a number of different art schools, different classes, and he's out now and doing fine. He's starting to have shows. There's so much talent in there, and so many people that didn't know they had talent. Now, Omid did know he was an artist, but many, many people that are so happy to find out they can make art, they can play music, they have so much more to offer and to feel good about themselves and something in the positive side. Meanwhile, people are living in these like 5 by 11 cells with 2 people and no privacy. But this also shows you how people are really good at making clay and different materials to use for miniatures and artwork and scrounging things and finding things, and they can create a lot very creatively. This is the yard, and I put this in here partly because I think a lot of you may know about the really, really bad pandemic story inside San Quentin, that over 3/4 of the men had COVID. There's a lot of long haul stories now. They were shut down for a long time, and we did send in paper lessons, but we did start going back in the beginning of July. And then there was one more shutdown since then for 2 weeks, but it didn't get out of hand. So the men all live like, if you've seen in Alcatraz or seen images, they're these concrete blocks, literally, that are 5 stories tall. And then along each floor or tier is a catwalk, and the bars, like on the little model you show, the bars. And there normally, when it's full, there's like 2 men in each of 500 cells. And it's crazy, but they're not always all full. And then there's this airspace next in front of all 5 tiers and little windows sometimes. And these buildings are from 1930, and there's no real circulation. Flu season is horrible in there. And now, there was no way that you could keep people in the old prisons like this and not have them get very sick. And 29 people died at San Quentin. But the people down on this lower yard in H unit, these are like bunk dorm houses, barracks style. They each originally had 200 people on 100 double bunks in one open space. And they took it down to 100 people in each building. But there were no cases of COVID here because the air flowed around, because the doors, the windows were open, and people could go out and come and go on the yard. So even though that sounds insanely crowded, there were no cases. So it was a nightmare what happened. And it's part of what's wrong with the mental and physical health conditions in prison are awful. So this is Ronnie Goodman, an artist that's dearly beloved by a lot of people in San Francisco. He learned a lot of printmaking and other things, but he'd always been an artist since he was a child. And this is the yard, and we have a lot of birds there. And his work, you'll see it in a bit, a little more about him. This was the architectural fellow, and that's the new hospital they had to build because the tall building, because the old one was so bad that we went into federal receivership for healthcare. So Peter Mert's photos of people, they show such respect, and these are great. And I love this, having the men with their work, even though it's this is right outside our studio. Bruce Fowler has done a lot of beautiful work and mural work there too. Once upon a time. Another thing that's the men do is contribute work within the prison, as well as going out to shows, or occasionally we're donating it to decorate. And, we've been different spaces outside, but this was a series of underwater images that are part of a clinic within the prison now. And this mural is pretty stunning. These are 5 of 16 panels, and this is going to go in the Chow Hall that's right next to our studio. And it's the most detailed mural I've ever seen. And it's this whole city. The thing is going to be 64 by 7 feet, which fits the wall at the back of the Chow Hall. And, you know, in that crowded, sometimes tense environment, there will be this like beautiful sort of a city to escape to. There's just gazebos in a park and kites flying and a million things going on, and it goes from day to night, and it's just a beautiful invention. So it was shown here. So this is Yerba Buena Center for the Arts when they had a show of community-based groups. There were about 8 of them, 2014. So there's Ronnie Goodman, and the power of having somebody like Ronnie who's been inside talk about his art and what it means to him, and have people be able to dialogue like that, there's just nothing like it. That was the piece that was in the show, because he ended up living on the streets. He kept doing his work over and over. You know, he just printed. He had his old blocks out and he'd print, and he kept painting and doing murals. But he passed during COVID, not from it. But now we're working on it. I think I'll be in the Mission. There's going to be a Day of the Dead giant altar to him from lots of people who've worked with him and knew him. And this was one of his images, that broken wings. And so we're all making healed wings for the altar. This reminds me, this is from a man named Justice Evans. This demonstrates another factor of what's wrong with prison, basically, and art can help. But they incarcerate a lot of people really young, like 18, 19, 20, and a lot of them don't get out for decades and decades. But he is out now. He got out around 40, but he'd been inside since he was a teenager. But he was a really smart, really good-hearted, hardworking man, helped a lot of other people. And one day he was just like a really nice presence. Plus he worked hard on a lot of art for all the shows or for his family. But he and a friend were talking about their past, and he was talking about these bad things he did when he was a teenager and in a gang and all that type of stuff. And I was just like, Justice, it just doesn't sound like you. How could you be like that? What happened? And he goes, I grew up. And that's a lot of what has to happen is, understanding and working with what people are going through at the age they're at and the development they're at and the kind of things that would actually help them, so that they don't have to then spend another 30 years recovering, essentially, and getting well. But this is Isaiah Daniels, big favorite for our talks on the outside. He's a great guy, good artist, and he works full-time as a Mason, and he's still doing his art. And this is called Generations. And stippling like this is another very popular style in prison that I hadn't seen much of outside. Bruce Fowler that I mentioned, all this, and that means know thyself, and all what looks like carved wood and everything, it's all just made out of cardboard and other materials. The inventiveness with the art materials is amazing. And San Francisco Silkscreen Collective did a series of workshops. And these have been shown multiple times in different places. And this is Bruce Fowler's again. Home of the Corporation of Incarceration. So I'm just going to share quickly, running out of time. The bird theme signifies freedom, obvious in many ways, and other things, I'm sure, freedom, flight. People do a lot of bird imagery. And then at San Quentin, we have a lot of birds, the geese on the field and the pigeons and just tons of birds. And even little ones will get trapped up in the studio. And when there's a little one that is found, you know, some people will take care of it too. It's just people really are very caretaking of little pets and such. This is Henry Frank, integration, and he's another brilliant artist, and he now works for the William James Association, and he has an active arts career. You'll see more of his work. He worked, he learned about his native heritage a lot more being inside. And then that is one of the other major aspects of why art is so powerful in prison, is that cultural identity and self-identity. Gary Harrell, who's out after 45 years, and then now he and his wife have started a portable shower program. They're up in Sacramento where he lives, like Lava May. Omid again. Yeah. Another Bruce Fowler. I've curated a lot of bird shows, I have to admit. The guys will be going like, no, not more birds. But this we use as the William James image on everything. And the man who did this, Rolf Kissman, he was in like under 10 years, but this was one of his first prints ever. And there is a large origami program. So the other factor I was talking about, cultural identity, I'm going to whiz through this because I'm almost out of time, but this is Joe Salazar's work, and it's such a strong means of growth, a way people grow by what they learn about themselves and their heritage and what they express with others. But what's amazing too is in the studio, different groups that wouldn't normally interact learn about each other and support each other for that work. And it's just powerful. Seeing that is powerful. Ansar al-Mohammed, who is in the prison system, is Phil Davis, but his legal name is actually on the painting. And this Lamavis Kamandoiwila, if any of you saw that Moad had a show during COVID that was all online, he had some beautiful work in that. And this is James Duff, who had grown up partly in Thailand. And this is a Hanuman figure. And he's still, this was from years ago, and he came in the other day and wanted color images of Hanuman, how it's traditionally drawn. So that's another thing we can do, is bring in images. Henry Frank again, back from a while back. And he's been out like 8 years, I think. Kelvin Ross grew up in Richmond, and his father owned a barbershop and had a whole chain in the area. That healthy memories. And this is a fellow, Jeff Isom, a really good painter, discovered that he has some Jewish heritage. So this was all a show called Heritage that went to the University of Derby in England, that they now have a permanent 4 years worth of permanent installations over there. And Orlando Smith, very active graphic novelist, comic style artist, has a piece at Afrofuturism show in the Oakland Museum now. And he's someone who, it's the horrible over sentencing, and I'm going to quickly read something about that, but he has had 8 robberies. I mean, he was definitely involved in drugs and a criminal, and 8 armed robberies. He was sentenced to 250 years. This is from Keith Watley, who founded Uncommon Law and works to get lifers out, works to defend them when they go to board. And this editorial ran the Chronicle last week, but roughly 1 in 3 people in California prisons are serving a life sentence, more than any other state. The overwhelming majority of these people are Black and Latinx, often sentenced at younger ages and for a wider range of crimes than whites. Black people in prison are more likely to be disciplined, to be locked in more restrictive settings, and to be denied parole when they become eligible. So here's someone who's really constructive, had essentially has a career still going on in the outside. He's published in several, regularly now in several progressive journals. You know, and I don't know, I don't think he was even doing much art before he came in, but he is saving himself as much as he can this way and helping others. This is Jun Hamamoto, teaches our origami class, and the guys teach each other too after that. It's wonderful. This piece, the two things happened at the same time a couple of weeks ago that just almost moved me to tears. So Jimmy Medell is a Pomo Indian who has someone who learned about his heritage, learned a lot more, has developed a lot of artwork using the traditions that, you know, the art from the Pomo, and he's leaving soon, thank goodness. But he did this piece called Dragon of Unity. His cellie is from Hong Kong and taught him or showed him these four symbols for family, love. I don't know them all. And so he had it in the studio, and this James Duff, who had done Hanuman, came over brought an elder Thai man to see it. And they were having this discussion across their cultures about this dragon and the imagery, and it's just beautiful. And it's got the horns and stuff are built up with glue, and they're textured and shiny. And this is going to be in our San Francisco Opera show, so you can see it. And this is Sonny Vasquez Ramirez. And this isn't the piece he's contributing. He's doing a piece called I Can't Breathe for the opera show. But he's discovered so much about himself through doing work based on Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo and other muralists. But he wrote this, all the pieces for the opera show, they want text. I can't breathe. While there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. And while there is a Jeff, Morgan, Shorty, Orlando, and Scotty in prison, I am not free. So that was one of those days where I just felt like the level of sensitivity and community and support here is just too beautiful, you know, and too much to keep inside like that. We need it out here. So I mentioned that the program was founded by Eloise Pickard Smith, originally as Prison Arts Project. UCSC has an opening this Saturday, and the show will be up till December 11th, about her and her life, her artwork and her children's artwork. They're grown up now, obviously, but it would be her 100th birthday. But and then there's a room there, a small room with arts and corrections work from the San Quentin Prison Arts Project. So we have some work out there now for the next few months, and some of it's brand new out of the prison since the lockdown, which is kind of amazing. And then we have a show at the San Francisco Opera, which is, you know, a little unusual, but they're doing an opera based by Beethoven, his only opera. And it says it's the precursor of the Ninth Symphony, but it's set in a prison in Spain in the 1700s, and they've redone it in contemporary like America now. The guys are in blues and jumpsuits, and they're in cells, and the stage is like Hollywood Squares, 9 cells stacked. And the lobby's going to have a small show of artwork from in San Quentin. And here's the teaser piece. This is by Henry Frank. It's called Easy Come, Easy Go. And he saw this. He saw a hummingbird sitting on some razor wire, and he just painted this in the last few weeks. So that's going to be in the show at the opera. And I don't have any links from them yet, but it's going to be online also. And there's going to be a talk at the Commonwealth Club by Henry and Isaiah and myself and people from the opera on October 25th. So you can get in touch with me if you want information on that. through Weed, I guess, or through my website, carolnewborg.com. And I'd be happy to tell you more about that. Oddly, 2 shows with our work up now, and we just came out of lockdown. So I am ready for questions.
Well, thank you, Carol. Let's give everybody a maybe just at least a visual round of applause. And what a wonderful, 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 wonderful view of your work.
Thank you.
Didn't even get to you to your own work. So,
No.
all right. So we're going to
Others.
close off this section in a moment. And then we'll have questions. So everybody just hang on for just a minute. We're going to close one recording and have the other one start. Just wanted to announce that Weed has 2 more upcoming Zoom events, which are the artist presentations for the Gallery Route 1 show. And some of the artists are on the show, and Pamela, the curator, Vicky Jo Soul, several others who were in the show. September 27th from 7 to 8 is going to be part 1, and September 30th from 5 to 6, which will be part 2, or also part 1, but the other artists. So please go to the Weed website, weedartists.org. We'll put it in the chat, and then you can sign up to meet the artists. Andre Thompson is also in the show. So a wonderful thanks to you, Carol.